Okay, so topic I want to talk about today is layer 2s, and particularly how we can make layer 2s and layer 1 on Ethereum talk to each other more quickly, right? So today, withdrawing from Optimism or Arbitrum takes a withdrawal period of 1 week, and this causes a lot of problems, and what we want to try to do is we want to try to reduce that all the way down to 1 slot. Now, the first question that I want to ask is basically, like, why do we care about this, right? Why do we care about faster communication between L2 and L1? And I think for me, there's 2 reasons why this is important. One of them is just a user experience, right? We want users to have a better experience. Waiting for 1 week is a bad experience. And the other reason is, well, we need Ethereum to be a more integrated ecosystem, right? So one of the challenges in Ethereum right now is like we have these L2 ecosystems, and the L2 ecosystems have been scaling quite well. Their technology has been improving quite well, but there's a lot of challenges with fragmentation. And if we want to try to reduce those challenges with fragmentation, then like we need to do things to actually make Optimism and Arbitrum and ZK Sync and Polygon and like all of these different parts of the bigger Ethereum world actually feel like they're parts of one Ethereum world instead of feeling like they're separate chains. So the status quo is depositing from L1 to L2 is pretty fast. It does take a lot of gas. It takes much more gas than it should or than it could, but it's pretty fast. Withdrawing from optimistic rollups requires waiting for 1 week. Now, over the past year, we've been doing these cross-L2 interoperability initiatives. So we started really paying attention to this problem in the summer of last year. And the 2 big things that we started focusing on, one of them is chain-specific addresses. So the address should contain the chain that the address is on. And the other is intent-based bridging, right? So basically, the idea is, if I have 1 ETH on Optimism and I want to move that 1 ETH to Arbitrum, I don't have to go and wait 1 week myself. Instead, what I can do is I can put the 1 ETH on Optimism into a smart contract, and then in that smart contract, it automatically gives that ETH to whoever first provides a proof that they sent the 1 ETH through a contract to my destination address on Arbitrum, right? So basically, you're offloading the work of actually transferring the ETH and actually moving it through L1 to a separate class of market makers. So the challenge is that liquidity is expensive, right? Basically, what we're saying is that if you want to move 1 ETH from Optimism to Arbitrum, then unless there are a lot of people who are constantly moving back and forth in roughly equal proportions, you're basically requiring some liquidity provider somewhere to lock up that 1 ETH for a week, and they're not able to do something else with it, right? So this is expensive. This basically means that, especially for larger transfers, transaction fees for going from one L2 to another L2 are needlessly high, right? And so we need these things to be fixed. So the easiest way to fix this is, well, or the most practical way to fix this is if we can find ways to reduce that 1 week window and make it something that's much faster, basically make communication between Ethereum L2s be as fast as doing things on Ethereum L1 itself, then we can solve a lot of these problems. So the question is, how do we do this, right? So step 1, right? We want to ask the question, well, why do we have these 1 week withdrawal windows right now? So the answer is that Optimism and Arbitrum and Inc., all of these stage 1 rollups that we have right now, they are optimistic rollups, right? Optimistic rollups basically means that the way that they prove that what's going on L2 is correct is that someone publishes a hash, and then you wait for a period of 1 week. And during that period of 1 week, you wait for someone else to challenge it. You wait for someone else to provide a proof that that hash is incorrect. And if nobody provides that proof, then you accept the hash. So the nice thing about optimistic systems is that they depend on very proven technology. There's not much cryptography. There's just hashes. It depends on game theory. It's a relatively simple construction. But the challenge is that in order to accept something, you have to wait 1 week. Now, why do you have to wait 1 week? Because, well, there are exceptional circumstances where potentially the chain might break, things might happen for periods that are less than that, right? For 8 hours is a delay during which people might be asleep. 1 day is 12 hours is the longest for which Ethereum has had a full outage. Back in 2016, the chain had a consensus failure where it went offline for about half a day. And so if we add like an extra safety buffer on top of that, we basically get to 1 week, right? And so basically, if we do not want to wait for 1 week, then we need to make a system where blocks can finalize entirely using like non-optimistic proof systems, right? And so this is where we get to this design that I proposed, which is like 2 of 3 ZK plus TEE plus OP, right? Basically, the idea is that you have 3 proof systems. One of them is optimistic rollup, one of them is ZK EVM, and one of them is EVM executing inside of trusted hardware. And you require 2 out of 3 of them to finalize a particular block. So this actually gives you 3 goals at the same time, right? So first of all, it means that in the normal case, you have instant finality. Why? Because in the normal case, you have a ZK and you have a TEE, and both of them will be able to successfully approve a block. And so in the normal case, once an L2 block happens, the state will be finalized on L1 within an hour, but actually like there's no lower limit, right? Like reducing the 1 hour to 12 seconds, I'll talk about it later, is basically just a question of efficiency. So that's goal number 1. Goal number 2 is we want L2s to be trustless, right? So we want proof systems to be able to finalize correct states and block incorrect states, even if the components that require trust are broken, right? So today, rollups are either stage 0 or stage 1, which means that they're putting some amount of trust or all of their trust in some kind of security council multisig. And a security council is a group of people, right? You might trust them, but like potentially you might not trust them. Trusted execution environments, they're also trusted, right? You have to trust the manufacturer to design them correctly. You have to trust the manufacturer to not keep a copy of the attestation keys themselves. And also, you have to trust that the hardware mechanism is not something that whoever is holding the hardware can go and break, right? You have to trust that they can't find a way to like laser the hardware, like infrared scan it, extract the information without breaking the chip. So and so what we want is we want layer 2s to be trustless. We want them to be secured by cryptography. And so what the scheme says is it basically says, well, if the cryptography is fine, meaning if the ZK and the OP system work, then the TE and the Security Council, they have no way to force an incorrect thing to happen. So we get trustlessness. Now, the third criterion that this satisfies is maturity, right? So ZK proof systems, they are immature, and ZK EVMs, they continue to have bugs in them. And unfortunately, some of these bugs, they have the property that like they are sort of global soundness breaks, right? Like they allow the attacker to just break everything and to prove whatever arbitrary state that they want. And so right now, we don't want to put all of our trust into ZK. And so what does this say? Well, it says that for this chain to break, you need either the ZK and the OP to be broken, or you need the ZK and the TE to be broken. Now, ZK and TE, they're pretty uncorrelated technologies. The kinds of factors that might lead to a broken ZK are very, very different from the kinds of factors that would lead to a broken TE, right? And so you're distributing trust between 3 different mechanisms that operate according to very different types of logic. And so if we have this design, then you'll be able to reduce the finalization period from 1 hour to, from 1 week to 1 hour. One other way, by the way, in which this is how I think about proof systems for layer 2s. I basically break them into two categories. One is institutional trust and one is cryptographic trust. And in the basically, like, are you trusting collections of people or are you trusting math, right? If you can trust math, trusting math is better, but you have to really trust the math and you have to really be confident that the math is correct. Now, and then the other dimension is fast versus slow, right? So things that are fast, they can approve things immediately. Things that are slow, you have to wait for some period of time. So what's interesting is that the four things over here, they basically are exactly the four types of proof system components that people have been using or even thinking about in the context of L2s so far, right? And so if we could actually like put them in a box and they just fit perfectly in the 2x2, right? So ZK is cryptographic and it's fast. So ZK is the ideal. The problem is ZK is immature today. Optimistic is also cryptographic, but it's slow. TEEs, they rely on institutional trust more, but they are fast. And security councils, they rely on institutional trust and they are slow. And so the argument is, well, actually TEEs are often something that could be slotted in positions where we use security councils today. And that doesn't decrease trust, and it does increase speed. So that was step one, right? So basically we've brought the withdrawal window from 1 week down to 1 hour. What does this give you? It basically means if you are using native bridging to move assets directly, your waiting time drops from 1 week to 1 hour. If you are using intent-based bridging, then intent-based bridging is instant, but liquidity providers, instead of waiting for 1 week, they have to wait for 1 hour. And so the cost of providing you liquidity drops by a factor of 168. And so the fees you have to pay will drop by up to a factor of 168. Now, this is step two, L1 S-load. So L1 S-load is an opcode that allows L2s to read a L1 asynchronously, right? So execution on an L2 will be able to do an S-load operation that reads storage operations on L1. This is a capability that L2s already have to have. Why? Because they have to be able to process deposits. And so the idea is, well, we can use that exact same capability. We take the exact same state that we're reading the deposit from, and we expose it to an L1 S-load opcode. And this actually unlocks a huge number of different and really interesting features, right? Basically, applications on L2s will be able to read L1 Oracle data. And this is really valuable, right? Because one of the challenges that L2s often face is that they have to pay a huge amount of money to get all kinds of custom application-specific integrations. And this is something that can really reduce that cost because in not all of those cases, but in many of those cases, the L2s will be able to just directly read the copies of those applications that exist on L1 already, right? So this applies to Oracle data. It applies to some things. It does not apply to things that require writing to L1. Now, key store wallets are another one of those interesting ideas, right? The idea of a key store wallet is basically that one basic thing in normal cybersecurity is you want to be rotating keys, right? You do not want keys to have an infinite lifetime. You want keys to stop being valid and you want to replace them with new keys. In cybersecurity outside of crypto, everyone accepts this. This is obvious. In crypto, we've gotten to this world where we're accepting people using the same private key for 10 years. This is bad. Now, part of the goal of account abstraction, which I won't talk about today, but I've talked about many times, is basically that it's about making accounts that have arbitrary logic so that you can do things like change the cryptographic algorithms, change the keys, make them quantum resistant, make them use ZK snarks, add recovery methods, all first-class citizens inside of Ethereum. Now, one of the challenges is if you can change keys, then you have 100 L2s. And so you have to change the record of what your current key is in 100 places. This is annoying. How do you fix this? Well, we fix this by putting the record of what your current key is on one central contract on L1, and then the copy of your wallet on each L2 can just read the L1. And so this makes a lot of very reasonable and very sane security practices much more viable and practical in an L2-centric world. So the other nice thing about this is that this makes workflows that incorporate the L2 and the L1 at the same time much easier and much more natural for developers, right? And so this helps strengthen a world where we're not just talking about Ethereum and a bunch of completely independent chains. We're actually talking about the Ethereum L1 continuing to be at the core of applications and people's user experiences. Now, that's step 2. So step 3 is proof aggregation. So before I mentioned that taking if we take this 2 of 3 based approach, or in the future, if we do really good formal verification, we rely just on ZK, we can reduce submission time from 1 week to 1 hour. Why 1 hour? Why not 12 seconds? There's 2 reasons why, and we can fix both of those reasons. The first reason is submission cost. So submitting a proof to L1 is something that costs an extra overhead, about 500,000 gas, and if you're Starkware and you're using Starks, it's about 3 million gas. This is a lot of gas, right? And it's a very high cost, right? So we can do a quick estimate. So let's say if the gas on L1 is about 15 gwei, which is about the average, multiply that by 500,000, then you have 7.5 million gwei to submit a proof, and then multiply that by an ETH cost of $1,500 today. 7.5 million goes to 11.2 billion, divide by a billion. We're talking $11 to submit a proof. Now, if you imagine a proof being submitted every slot, there's 2.5 million slots in a year. And so we multiply $11 by 2.5 million slots, and we get a cost of $27.5 million a year just to maintain an L2. This is crazy. Who here wants to pay $27 million a year? OK, no hands are up. That's good. Okay, so basically, this is why L2s are not committing in every single slot today, right? Instead, they're committing these proofs once every hour. If you commit once every minute instead of once every 12 seconds, your $27 million a year drops to $5.5 million a year. And then if you do it once every hour, it drops to under $100,000 a year, right? Which is actually manageable, and it's actually less than your ZK proving and infra costs by quite a lot. So the question is, well, can we actually fix this, right? And the natural solution here is proof aggregation. Basically, if we have a large number of different L2s, then instead of these L2s separately submitting n different proofs to chain, provers can submit their proofs to an aggregator, and then the aggregator can submit a single snark that proves the existence of n other snarks, and the cost of verifying that snark is just a one-time cost of 500,000 gas. And so what happens here is basically what's in this diagram, right? Basically, you have a bunch of proofs, and the proofs also specify which contract they're proving a statement for, what the statement is. It could be like an old state root, a new state root, a block. And then you have an aggregate proof. The aggregate proof gets verified. The aggregate proof has all of the information for the individual rollups as public inputs. And then the proving happens once. And then this contract just makes one single call to every rollup. And the only thing that the call does is for every rollup, it just separately makes an S load, right? And so the cost per rollup goes down from 500,000 gas to less than 10,000 gas. So, and then on top of this, we also have other plans that I'll talk about tomorrow to increase the gas space of the L1 by a factor of 10, and so basically all of this becomes much cheaper. So this is step 3. Now, there's also a step 4, which is reducing prover latency, right? Basically, the challenge is that proving a computation takes much more computational power than doing the computation. But by default, this computation does not get parallelized, right? And so the problem is, by default, you imagine a computation with 1 billion steps. That turns into a 1 billion degree polynomial. You have to extend that to like 16 billion or 4 billion or whatever different points that you're doing fry between. And you have to like do this really intensive computation where you're like mixing all of the different data to do FFTs, and you're doing this all on one machine. It's not super parallelization friendly. And so the result is that, well, in equilibrium, a block that takes 5 seconds to generate is still going to take, like, say, 500 seconds to prove, right? So this is a problem. And so the question is, how do we fix it? So 2 ideas. One is we can use specialized hardware to do proving, right? So FPGAs, ASICs, there's companies that are doing this already, right? And so if you get a hardware acceleration factor of 100x, then you can go down to proving in real time. The other idea is ultra-parallelizable provers. So from a mathematical perspective, this is actually really simple, right? Basically, you break down your computation into many steps, then you separately, in parallel, on a different device, generate a proof of every step, and then you start aggregating, right? So your first 2 proofs, or you could have like a branching factor of like 8, you could have whatever branching factor you want. Your first 2 proofs get merged into a merged proof, and then your first 2 merged proofs get merged into a bigger merged proof, and so you have a tree of proofs of depth log n. And so you only need log n rounds of one proving operation and log n rounds of communication. We already know that this recursive proving operation only takes about 150 milliseconds. And the communication, obviously, it takes like 1 millisecond if your computers are on the same device, maybe 50 milliseconds if they're actually distributed in different locations. And so if you can split your computation, then you can prove your computation extremely quickly. Right? And so the main challenge is, well, how do you do this splitting? And it turns out that if you go the way that provers have been going already, and you prove a RISC-V computation that is the compilation of the EVM, then that already makes it fairly natural to do the splitting. And so this solves the latency problem. It does not solve one problem, right? The problem that it does not solve is basically the problem of reducing proving cost. Today, ZK proving costs about $1 million a year for an Ethereum L1 sized EVM chain. And then if Ethereum L1 is going to go by 10x, and then if all of the rollups are going to go by 10x, that obviously increases to $10 million a year. This is too much. And so we also need ongoing work on improving prover efficiency, right? And here, like, I'm personally optimistic. And the reason I'm optimistic is basically because we just keep on finding more and more efficiency improvements. Like, we've had a historical trend where basically every year these costs have been reducing by 10x. And so I think we can keep reducing them by 10x even more, right? And then if that's not enough, then specialized hardware is going to make proving faster, and at the same time, it's also going to make proving much, much cheaper, right? So we have a lot of options here. So what are the long-term goals that all of this gets to, right? The basic goal is we need 12-second native asynchronous communication between L2s and the L1. So in this kind of world, users might still use intents for many operations. So the simple reason is speed and cost, right? Basically, even in this world, moving ETH from Optimism to Arbitrum natively, it would still take 12 seconds plus an Optimism block plus an Arbitrum block, maybe altogether like 15 to 20 seconds. But if you use intents, Optimism and Arbitrum both have slots that are much faster than Ethereum slots, and so you will be able to do it in 2 seconds. So liquidity is going to be ultra cheap, right? So if you use intents, you'll be able to move basically unlimited amounts of ETH very quickly at a low cost. So also this means that we can get much tighter links between L1 and L2. And it becomes much more natural to write applications that have some components on both of these pieces, right? And so we get, as a consequence of this, a world that is much more integrated, and also a world where doing everything within the Ethereum blockchain just becomes much easier and much faster for everyone to do. So thank you. Thank you.